Hi, and welcome to this episode of our tutorial series on the AVR framework version 3. In this episode, I want to talk about the active component. The active component belongs to the state component and describes the very trivial binary state of an object, meaning the active component should signal when something is active or inactive, whether it is turned on or it is turned off. Here I have a very typical example. This light has the select component and an active component on it. The select component is set to communicate with the active component, so when I select the active component is being toggled, allowing me to turn it on and off. Another example would be the TV. It has the gaze component on it, which opens up the play button on gaze. The play button naturally interacts with the active component, which allows me to turn the TV on and off using this button. The state component can also be combined in any way. This lever is set to communicate with the listen to trigger component on the TV, which in turn is set to communicate with the active component. So using this lever, I can also turn on the TV and turn it off. So let us take a look at what this looks like in the editor. So here inside the editor, we can create ourselves a new blueprint. And I will just make a very simple example. I will make a battery. And in here, add a static mesh and just use the battery. And in here we can place it, and we can add the active component on it. And now with the active component, the possibility what we can do is we can decide whether it's going to be on and off, and we can decide what happens if the state is changed. So this is a very simple component. It simply just tells us whether something is active or not active. And let's decide what we are going to do, when it's active and when it's not active. Just a simple branch, and let me just simply add a particle system to it, and let's call that fuse, so we can simply see whether that works or not. And on that we're going to activate it or deactivate it. So when it's active, it should be activated, and when it's inactive, it should be deactivated. Okay, so now we already see that we can hit it active, and then the sparkles appear, and if we turn them off, the sparkles disappear. So this is going to be helpful if we want to preset anything. Like I have a few batteries, so some are active, some are inactive. This is how you can specify that on start. And now if we hit play, we can't interact with it yet. That's because it doesn't have an interaction component or anything toggling the active component. So to do that, the very simple thing would be, for example, to add a select component on it. And then we can tell the select component to be talking with the active component. And we have to tell it to also trigger ourselves. That's because it should trigger an active component on ourselves. Okay, and now if we play and compile, you can see that we can highlight it, and it toggles our sparkles. As I also explained, you can concatenate different components. So for example, if you create another another object. I'll just drop in, for example, a cube and put in a select component on there. We can tell the select component on this cube to be talking to an active component, and we can also specify the actor that it should talk to, the battery. And it doesn't need to trigger ourselves because we don't want to have anything happening on the cube. It just needs to trigger the battery itself. And now if we hit play, we can see that we can toggle our batteries this way. So the active component can be very useful, especially even though it's very trivial in kind of what it does, it packs a lot of information underneath. So first of all, it has the advantage that whatever button you have, or if you have like a selection button or a lever or something like that, you can tell it to talk to the active component, and then it kind of knows how to talk to it. The other big advantage is that it allows replication, meaning if we go on the battery and set the actor to replicate, then we can see that if we save and compile, we have a two-player game. Now we can see that in a two-player game, the battery also turns on and off. One thing to know is if I press this thing, it turns off on the server, but on the client, it doesn't turn on and off. That is because the cube itself is not replicated. We haven't set the cube itself to be replicated. And for that to be replicated, there actually needs to be a blueprint. You cannot just do it on here, which I find very sad sometimes, because it doesn't allow us to put in just random actors. You would actually have to put in a blueprint and put the select component on that, which is not much of a problem. I could quickly do it right here in creating a blueprint, new cube class. And this already had the select component on it. Set it to replicate. And this is this cube class. And now if I hit play on it, we can see that very importantly, the select component is not set to trigger anything. Yeah, and now it triggers the same event on both sides. Okay, so this is everything I wanted to talk about the active component. I know it's a very simple component, but it's very useful in many situations. And I advise you, if you build your own actors, that you try to define your states through these kind of components. So these can handle the replication elements, and you can set your interaction components to be communicating with the state components. Okay, that was it. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next episode.